Taylor, what do you think of the band name? See, I thought it was really cool. I must be really a dipshit. But Taylor embodied raw life force. But behind the scenes, he was a man who stumbled more than once, haunted by childhood traumas, shadowed by addiction, weighed down by the loneliness of the artist's life and the pressure of being a performance machine that's not allowed to stop. His sudden death on the night of March 25, 2022 in Colombia, just 1 hour before showtime, didn't just bring the band to its knees, it left a gaping void in the hearts of fans around the world. But to understand why Taylor Hawkins was not just a gifted drummer, but a symbol of an entire rock generation, we must retrace the path of his life. A solo filled with highs and lows, sometimes offbeat, but never lacking in passion, and one that still echoes in the memories of those who loved him. Early life. Taylor Hawkins was born on February 17, 1972, in Fort Worth, Texas, the youngest of 3 siblings. His family later moved to Laguna Beach, California, when Taylor was just 5 years old, a beautiful coastal town, but one filled with invisible pressures. His father was the typical 1970s man, quiet, tough, emotionally distant. In contrast, his mother, always loving and gentle, carried her own silent demons that every child in the household had to learn to live with. Taylor once said, "My mom had a dark side. When she passed out on the sofa from exhaustion, it was my sister Heather who cooked dinner and took care of everything." In Taylor's memory, his mother was the only one who truly believed in his musical potential. When he stood in the living room singing, dancing, pretending to perform, she was the sole audience member who clapped patiently. She was also the first to see his fascination with drums and the first to believe he would go far. His father, on the other hand, showed little interest. Taylor once shared that his dad never really acknowledged his talent or passions, not out of cruelty, but perhaps because of work and the emotional reserve of a generation unaccustomed to open affection. That emotional gap is what drove Taylor to music as an escape. He once described himself as a fat, dumb kid who failed at everything. Not good at school, not athletic, not socially popular. Everything changed when a neighbor let him bang on an old drum kit. Taylor was instantly hooked, and the neighbor encouraged him. "You were born to play drums." Not long after, a female friend of his had an older brother who went off to the military, leaving behind a pile of rock records. Among those dusty, corner-worn album sleeves, Taylor discovered News of the World by Queen, and his world shifted. He immersed himself in Roger Taylor's drumming, was swept away by the soundtracks of Star Wars, Superman, and the sweeping scores of John Williams. Big, dramatic, emotionally layered sounds that he said he felt with his heart, not just heard with his ears. In high school, Taylor lived in 2 parallel worlds. Surfing by day, playing music by night in various cover bands, and practicing drums by playing along to albums by Rush, Genesis, and The Police. While glam metal dominated the charts at the time, Taylor gravitated toward alternative rock, especially Jane's Addiction, whose raw, honest, and rebellious sound made him feel like he finally belonged somewhere. No one could have predicted that this insecure boy who failed at nearly everything would find his voice through a pair of drumsticks. And few realized that it was precisely this quiet, complicated childhood that shaped him into an artist who burned with fire on stage, yet remained deeply sensitive when the lights went down. Early career. After graduating high school, Taylor Hawkins left Laguna Beach and moved to Venice, where he immersed himself in the gritty street music scene. A world where young artists weren't chasing fame, but seeking freedom through sound. There, he and his friends formed a band called Sylvia, a small group clearly inspired by Jane's Addiction. Raw, unpolished, but brimming with hunger and instinct. One night, Sylvia performed at Club Lingerie, a small venue in Los Angeles. In the sparse crowd was a man named Stevie Salas, who happened to be looking for a drummer for Canadian singer Sash Jordan, who was about to open for Aerosmith's European tour. Salas wasn't impressed by the band as a whole, but by the sight of a long-haired drummer with wild energy and undeniable presence. After the show, he simply said, "I need someone who understands punk and alternative, and that kid has something strange about him." At just 22 years old, Taylor Hawkins embarked on his first tour with Sash Jordan and immediately became a standout on stage. His skills were still rough around the edges, but he shone with what Jordan described as a light and love radiating from within. She recalled, "Knew the moment he walked into the room. Some people draw you and like light down your spine. Taylor was one of them." During one opening gig for Steve Perry, the legendary frontman of Journey, Taylor caught the attention of Scott Welch, Perry's manager, who also worked with a rising artist named Alanis Morissette. At the time, Alanis had just completed her breakthrough album, Jagged Little Pill, and was looking for a drummer for her global tour. Taylor was quickly invited to audition and soon became an essential part of Alanis' live band, alongside guitarist Chris Chaney. What followed was an explosive 2-year journey, playing some of the biggest stages in the world. With his striking looks, windswept blonde hair, and showman-style drumming, Taylor Hawkins stood out as much as the lead singer. He wasn't just a drummer. He was part of the soul behind fiery performances of You Oughta Know, Hand in My Pocket, and Ironic. When asked why he chose to play behind a solo artist, Taylor once said, "Because it was a real band, not just her show. Alanis let me be myself. I got to play music with my whole being." In 1995, during KROQ's Almost Acoustic Christmas event, Taylor met Dave Grohl for the first time. Foo Fighters and Alanis were both on the lineup that day. Taylor later said, "I was just the backup drummer kid and Dave was the guy I idolized in Nirvana. But he was incredibly friendly. We smoked together, talked about Queen and the Police, and I just knew I had met someone who was going to change my life." No one could have predicted it at the time. But that moment marked the beginning of one of the deepest friendships in rock history, and the start of a new chapter, where Taylor would no longer stand behind someone else's spotlight, but step forward as the official drummer of Foo Fighters. Yet, as with everything in Taylor Hawkins' life, the road ahead would be anything but smooth. Career breakthrough in 1997, when Dave Grohl called Taylor Hawkins to ask if he knew any drummers suitable for Foo Fighters after William Goldsmith's departure. Taylor didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I'll do it," he answered, short, firm, and full of passion. At the time, Foo Fighters were still an up-and-coming band while Alanis Morissette had already conquered the world. But Taylor chose rock, not for the money, but for the music that made him feel truly alive. His first show with Foo Fighters was a secret gig on April 19, 1997, at the Alligator Lounge in Santa Monica. From there, he embarked on a journey with the band through every stage of their evolution, from media skepticism to electrifying stadium performances. The first album Taylor contributed to as the official drummer was There Is Nothing Left to Lose, 1999. Although he only played on part of the record, he admitted feeling nervous in the studio, suffering from red light fever, the anxiety that hits when the studio recording light goes on. But this was the beginning of a powerful dynamic with Grohl. Dave, once Nirvana's drummer, knew exactly what he needed from one. Taylor, who had idolized Grohl since his teens, brought a fresh spark to the band. By the early 2000s, Foo Fighters were breaking through. The album One by One, 2002, with hits like All My Life and Times Like These, marked a revival after a near breakup and tense recording sessions. Taylor did more than just play drums. He co-wrote, arranged, and helped define a sound that was both precise and feral, blending arena rock power with unwavering authenticity. In the years that followed, Foo Fighters became one of the biggest rock bands in the world. They racked up Grammy Awards, sold tens of millions of albums, and played legendary stages. Wembley, Glastonbury, Lollapalooza, Rock in Rio, and Taylor Hawkins, with his golden hair, explosive drumming, and undeniable stage presence, was indispensable to that success. But Taylor's accomplishments extended beyond Foo Fighters. He began writing his own songs, playing guitar, singing lead, and founded Taylor Hawkins and the Coattail Riders in 2006, a band where he could explore another side of himself, humorous, inventive, and boundless. Albums like Red Light Fever and Get the Money showcased that he wasn't just a phenomenal drummer, but a complete musician. He also joined multiple side projects including Birds of Satan, NHC, with members of Jane's Addiction, and the cover band Chevy Metal. He became a frequent collaborator with legends like Elton John, Slash, Brian May, and Coheed and Cambria. Wherever drums needed a unique personality, Taylor Hawkins was there. More than anything, Taylor was the soul of the stage. He didn't just play, he performed, told stories, and sometimes even swapped roles with Dave Grohl to sing lead. His renditions of Under Pressure, Queen, Somebody to Love, and Rock and Roll, Led Zeppelin, were often highlights of every show. Across nearly 25 years with Foo Fighters, Taylor played on every major album, from In Your Honor to Concrete and Gold, and finally Medicine at Midnight, 2021, which he once described as weird, experimental, but exhilarating. Even as he became one of the most renowned drummers in the world, Taylor Hawkins never lost that garage band spirit. Free, untamed, always creating. For him, drumming wasn't a job. It was the only way to be truly himself. And because he lived that way, fully, fiercely, every show, every beat, every laugh became part of a musical legacy that can never be replaced. He wasn't just the drummer who kept the band in rhythm. He was the one who kept the hearts of fans beating strong for nearly 3 decades. Struggles and addiction. Taylor Hawkins once joked that if he weren't the drummer for Foo Fighters, he'd probably be delivering pizzas. That half-joking remark wasn't just modesty, it revealed a truth. He never saw himself as some untouchable rock star. Taylor always carried the feeling that he was chasing something: fame, passion, or perhaps just the sensation of being free. And because he never stopped running, there were times he crossed his own limits. In the late 1990s, as Foo Fighters began to rise, the band's touring schedule became relentless. One tour after another, planes, hotels, stages, noise, and the pressure to sustain rock energy night after night. Dave Grohl, having lived through the glare and tragedy of Nirvana, was used to it. But for Taylor, freshly transitioned from Alanis Morissette's backup drummer to a full-time member of a rising global band, this pace was a shock to the system. In 2001, after a night of partying in the UK, right after a show at the V Festival, Taylor took a dose of heroin that was too strong. No one knows exactly what happened, only that by the next morning he was no longer conscious. Doctors confirmed he was in a deep coma. For those close to him, the memory still lingers like a nightmare. Dave Grohl, friend, bandmate, and leader, sat by his hospital bed, waiting. For a moment, it felt like history was repeating itself. He had already lost Kurt Cobain. Now it seemed he might lose another brother. But Taylor woke up, and for the first time, he began to face himself. He didn't immediately become a changed man. He later admitted, "I loved doing drugs, but I lost control. I believed in the myth of live fast, die young, and I almost made it come true." Recovery came slowly, step by step. He quit smoking, started exercising, and became obsessed with mountain biking, a new kind of addiction, healthier, but still revealing his constant need to fill a void. He became more mindful of his health, spent more time with his family, and tried to live a more balanced life. But for an artist always running to the beat, too much stillness could also stir restlessness. In his 40s, Taylor began to worry about physical limits. He confessed to having stage fright, not from the lights, but from his own body. "I'm not 25 anymore," he told Rolling Stone. "Every time I go on stage, I have to keep up with people 20 years younger. It's like fighting my own age." From 2018 onward, those around him began to notice changes. His longtime drum tech, nicknamed Yeti, recalled a period when Taylor lost a significant amount of weight, couldn't sleep, and looked completely drained. He ate irregularly, exercised less, and always seemed anxious. Though he never complained publicly, the changes showed in subtle ways. Sunken eyes, a slower voice, and sometimes a silence between the laughter. By late 2021, Foo Fighters returned to touring post-COVID with a packed schedule. One night on a plane, Taylor passed out and had to be revived with 4 fluids. He didn't appear at the Abu Dhabi show, and according to Chad Smith, drummer of Red Hot Chili Peppers, that was the moment Taylor finally had to confront the ultimate boundary: his health. Soon after, according to close friends, Taylor had a private conversation with Dave Grohl and the band's management, requesting a lighter tour schedule. He said, "I can't keep up this pace anymore. We need to figure something out." But Foo Fighters camp denied any formal request. Everyone either stayed silent or claimed it was just a personal reflection, not an official ask. What's important is that despite the fatigue, Taylor never stopped trying. In early 2022, he excitedly told Yeti, "I've hired a trainer. I'm working hard. I've gained 15 pounds. I'm finally doing it right." Those closest to him believed Taylor truly wanted to get back on track, to stay healthy, to restore balance. But sometimes, recovery arrives slower than the body allows, and Taylor Hawkins, though he had walked through the darkness, still carried scars not visible to the eye but never erased. Even amid the thunder of his drums, he was an artist who lived with heartbreaking honesty. And like so many in that world, the price of truth is often the hardest to predict. Personal life: Taylor Hawkins was never the kind of artist who put his private life on display. He wasn't caught in romantic scandals, didn't cross over into media circuits, and rarely shared personal stories on talk shows. But to those who knew him well, Taylor was a deeply affectionate man, fiercely loyal to his family, and someone who lived with a simplicity that seemed almost surprising given the spotlight he had stepped into. In 2005, during a peak in his career with Foo Fighters, Taylor married Allison, the woman who stood by his side for more than 17 years. They weren't a red carpet couple, but in every chapter of his journey, from the stage to behind the scenes, Allison was there. Together, they had 3 children, including their daughter Annabelle, who directly inspired the song Middle Child, featured on Taylor's solo album, Get the Money. In it, he explored some of the most intimate facets of being a suburban dad. Get the Money wasn't just a fun side project. It was a brief but heartfelt declaration. Taylor wasn't only the drummer in a legendary rock band. He was a man who drove his kids to school, spent evenings playing guitar in the garage, and occasionally drummed with friends' cover bands at local events. He once said, "I know I'll never be a Freddie Mercury or a Dave Grohl, but I can be a good dad, a funny husband, and a nice neighbor. That's enough for me." When not on tour, Taylor lived in Topanga Canyon, a quiet, wooded area in California where the air smelled of pine and the hills rolled endlessly. There, he built a small home studio, working independently, jamming with friends, writing, recording, sometimes just for fun. Neighbors described him as cheerful, often seen biking in the mornings, greeting everyone, never acting like a rock star. Yet, as a sensitive artist, Taylor carried his share of insecurities. In one rare interview, he confessed to feeling overwhelmed by his role. "But a lot of times I just want to go home, sit with my daughter, and watch cartoons." Taylor loved his wife, his kids, and his fans. In his own quiet way, he was known for always signing autographs, never refusing a photo, and most importantly, never taking fan love for granted. One now famous story before his passing involved a 9-year-old girl named Emma Sophia, who brought her toy drum kit outside his hotel and played for her idol. Taylor didn't just come down to take a picture, he spent time talking with her, encouraging her, and gave what many described as the warmest smile of the day. Emma's parents recalled it was supposed to be her worst day, and Taylor made it her best. He didn't need big stages or flashy awards to be remembered. Taylor Hawkins left a mark not just because he played drums brilliantly, but because he lived among others as if music were something real, simple, and capable of touching hearts with a kind word, a pat on the back, or a hug for his daughter in the middle of the night. He didn't need a medal to prove he was a good father, because those who live from the heart never have to prove it at all. Final years. As he entered his 50s, Taylor Hawkins was no longer the fiery young man sprinting across the stage, hair flying in the wind. He still radiated an astonishing life force, still made audiences rise to their feet the moment his drums kicked in. But inside, his body and mind had begun sending out distress signals. After the COVID-19 pandemic, as Foo Fighters returned with the album Medicine at Midnight and the horror comedy film Studio 666, Taylor felt more conflicted than ever. On one hand, he wanted to keep going, music was his life, but on the other, the relentless schedule was draining him, physically and mentally. He admitted to having stage fright, no longer feeling as confident as before. "I'm not the 25-year-old kid anymore. Every show feels like a race, I'm just trying to survive." In late 2021, on a flight to Abu Dhabi, Taylor lost consciousness and had to be revived with 4 fluids. The show was canceled. That incident felt like a warning. According to Chad Smith, drummer for Red Hot Chili Peppers, Taylor had a serious conversation with Dave Grohl and the band's management, candidly saying, "I can't keep doing this. We need to make adjustments." As he entered his 50s, Taylor Hawkins was no longer the fiery young man sprinting across the stage, hair flying in the wind. He still radiated an astonishing life force, still made audiences rise to their feet the moment his drums kicked in. But inside, his body and mind had begun sending out distress signals. After the COVID-19 pandemic, as Foo Fighters returned with the album Medicine at Midnight and the horror comedy film Studio 666, Taylor felt more conflicted than ever. On one hand, he wanted to keep going. Music was his life. But on the other, the relentless schedule was draining him, physically and mentally. He admitted to having stage fright, no longer feeling as confident as before. "I'm not the 25-year-old kid anymore. Every show feels like a race. I'm just trying to survive." In late 2021, on a flight to Abu Dhabi, Taylor lost consciousness and had to be revived with 4 fluids. The show was canceled. That incident felt like a warning. According to Chad Smith, drummer for Red Hot Chili Peppers, Taylor had a serious conversation with Dave Grohl and the band's management, candidly saying, "I can't keep doing this. We need to make adjustments." At 7:40 p.m., an ambulance arrived. Paramedics attempted CPR, but Taylor Hawkins was already gone. No more drumming, no more mischievous smile, no more sparkling eyes beneath that long blonde hair. He died on the spot at the age of 50. The band announced the heartbreaking news at 9:59 p.m. that same night, just minutes after thousands of fans learned the show would not go on. The stage fell silent. The music stopped. Only candles and tears remained, public reaction and lingering questions. When news of Taylor Hawkins' sudden death spread on the evening of March 25, 2022, it not only stunned the rock community, but left a painful reverberation across the world. At the Estéreo Picnic Festival stage in Bogotá, where Foo Fighters were set to perform, thousands were still crowded in anticipation. They were unaware that the band's fiery drummer had taken his final breath just an hour before the stage lights were due to come on. Instead of the thunderous drum beat kicking off Everlong, whispers filled the night, followed by choked sobs. The stage was no longer a performance space. It became a memorial where hundreds of candles were lit for a soul who had left the game he loved more than anything. Foo Fighters immediately canceled the remaining shows of their South American tour. In a brief but heartfelt statement, they wrote, "The Foo Fighters family is devastated by the sudden and tragic loss of our beloved brother Taylor Hawkins. His laughter and musical spirit will live on with us forever." The message spread quickly and major artists paid their tributes in their own ways. Ozzy Osbourne called Taylor a wonderful person and an extraordinary musician. Travis Barker, overcome with emotion, said, "I don't know what to write. Saying I miss him isn't enough. See you again. We'll talk drums and smoke in the dressing room." Billie Eilish at the Grammy Awards a week later wore a shirt bearing Taylor's face during her performance. Miley Cyrus, who stepped in for Foo Fighters at Lollapalooza, Brazil, dedicated her entire set to Taylor, breaking down in tears on stage. Roger Taylor of Queen, Taylor's idol, shared a photo with his son Rufus, Taylor's prized student, with a choked farewell. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin posted a performance photo with Taylor, recalling the technique, energy, and radiant innocence he saw in his younger friend. But the outpouring of grief soon gave way to something else. Questions. Taylor Hawkins was no stranger to close calls. He had once fallen into a 2-week coma due to a drug overdose in London in 2001, and since then he had strived to live healthily, training rigorously, and undergoing regular health checkups. Just months before his death, he confidently told Rolling Stone, "I just had a full checkup. The doctor said I'm in great shape. My heart's big because I train like an endurance athlete." So what really happened? A forensic report from Colombia revealed troubling findings. Taylor's heart weighed 600 grams, nearly double the normal size. A urine test showed over 10 substances in his system, including opioids, tricyclic antidepressants, benzodiazepines, THC, and more. Some sources mentioned a cocaine-like substance found in the room, but this was later omitted from the prosecutor's official statement. The ambiguity only deepened the unease. As fans grappled with the loss, Rolling Stone published an investigative piece in May 2022. Close friends like Matt Cameron, Pearl Jam, and Chad Smith, Red Hot Chili Peppers, revealed that Taylor had confided he couldn't handle Foo Fighters' grueling tour schedule, had asked management to lighten it, and had felt like he was about to collapse. According to the article, Taylor had said, "I can't take it anymore. This schedule is killing me." But days later, both Cameron and Smith backtracked, claiming their words were taken out of context. Meanwhile, the band's representatives remained silent, fueling further confusion. Fans became divided. Some saw it as a tragic accident, a former drug user whose body was worn down by years of high-intensity performances. Others believed Taylor had tried to speak out but was ignored in the glittering churn of the entertainment industry. A final voicemail later surfaced, left by Taylor for his close friends, the Farrells, a dagger to the hearts of those left behind. "Take care of each other, okay? I'll take care of myself. See you in Sao Paulo. I love you guys." It wasn't a goodbye. It was a promise. A promise he couldn't keep. Taylor Hawkins' death remains without clear answers. No one can say for certain what happened. All we know is that a man who once beamed behind his drum kit, who bent down to sign an autograph for a 9-year-old girl in Paraguay, who dedicated an entire album to his daughter, quietly fell just before showtime. Perhaps he was simply exhausted. Perhaps he was still trying. And perhaps in his final moments he still believed the show would go on. And that perhaps is the true tragedy. Legacy and impact. Taylor Hawkins was never the kind of person who sought titles. He never demanded the spotlight, nor did he need grand praise to validate his place. Yet when people speak of the greatest drummers of the modern era, names like John Bonham, Neil Peart, or Roger Taylor, Taylor Hawkins often appears quietly among them. Not because of superhuman technique, but because of the wild, sincere spirit he poured into every strike of the drumstick. Taylor wasn't just the timekeeper for Foo Fighters. He was the band's second heartbeat. If Dave Grohl was the brain and soul, then Taylor was the lifeblood. The one who brought energy, fire, and vitality to every performance. He didn't just play drums, he lived inside them. Each beat was a piece of himself, a piece of his heart, and a part of that bright, messy smile that always peeked out from behind his wild blonde hair. His technique was a fusion of classic rock fire and grunge freedom, polished yet instinctive. He could make stadiums quake with The Pretender or All My Life, and just as easily step back, holding a steady groove for Grohl to take the lead. The ultimate bandmate. Beyond drumming, Taylor was also the frontman of his own band, Taylor Hawkins and the Coattail Riders, where he showcased his songwriting, vocals, and stage presence on his own terms. The album Get the Money, 2019, was a clear reflection of that. Playful, introspective, filled with love for his family, and laced with the rebellious spirit of someone determined to live on his own terms. He also performed with Alanis Morissette and appeared as a guest on projects by Slash, Brian May, and Elton John, a trusted collaborator in the global rock scene. Taylor was a bridge between generations of artists. He revered legends like Roger Taylor and Jimmy Page, and became a role model to younger stars like Billie Eilish, Miley Cyrus, and countless young drummers who once stood in awe watching him perform. After his passing, many didn't just remember him as a musician, but as a mentor, a friend to all, always willing to talk, share, and encourage. But perhaps the greatest legacy Taylor Hawkins left behind wasn't found in charts or records. It was in how he inspired others to live fully and authentically. He was once the fat, dumb kid nobody liked who believed he would never amount to anything, until he picked up a pair of drumsticks and found what made him come alive. He lived fast, lived honestly, loved his kids so deeply he wrote an album for them, hugged young fans like family, and stepped outside just to take photos with a few people drumming on the sidewalk. Taylor didn't build monuments, but he left real footprints in the hearts of those who heard him play, saw his smile on stage, and mourned when he was suddenly gone. And like a drum solo, brief, maybe cut short, but played with every ounce of soul, it stays in the listener's heart forever. That's the kind of legacy Taylor Hawkins created. Taylor Hawkins didn't fade away like a star losing its light. He departed like the final thunderous strike in a rock song that ended too soon. He once said, "I don't want to preach about not doing drugs because I love them, but I lost control and it almost killed me." It was a confession without filters, without polish, a rare kind of courage, especially in a world where fame often demands a clean image. Taylor lived truthfully. He loved music like a child, loved his family like a devoted father, loved his fans like old friends reunited. And he left this world the same way he lived, without warning, without spectacle, but leaving behind a void no one could ever fill. Over 2 decades with Foo Fighters, deeply personal solo albums, explosive drum solos, tender voice messages to friends, all of it has now become memory. But not a sad memory. Rather, a reminder that some people don't need a full century to be remembered forever. If you've ever found yourself drumming along unconsciously to a Foo Fighters track, laughed watching Taylor hug his drum kit like a kid hugging a teddy bear, or felt a lump in your throat seeing his eyes during those final days, then maybe, in some way, you understand why Taylor Hawkins wasn't just a drummer. He was the heartbeat of an entire era. Share your favorite musical memory of Taylor Hawkins in the comments. And if you believe artists like him deserve to be remembered forever, like, subscribe, and ring the bell to keep these stories alive.